All right, Chris, thanks for being here, man. Good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, my pleasure, Brandon. Always good to see you.
Awesome. Yeah. So for people that are listening to this or watching this, Chris is the PhD who did the manuscript for the Blushield pilot clinical trial study that we did recently, and got to know Chris over the last few months because it's been quite the lengthy process. And Chris is, if you're into, taking charge of your health, being self-reliant and motivated and educated when it comes to health and wellness, he's doing the good fight. He's a freedom fighter. He's a health fighter. Really come to appreciate you, Chris, and I'm really glad you took some time out of your busy schedule to be here and have this conversation with us today.
Likewise, I appreciate it. You've got tools that help those of us that are interested in health, optimizing our health and health freedom. You've done a lot of good work there too. So always nice to connect with kindred spirits.
Yeah, awesome. So I was thinking maybe you could just start by going over your background, what it is that you've accomplished and what you're up to these days.
Sure. So I am a conventional epidemiologist by training. Actually had a first career in healthcare management consulting and just was not feeling it. Basically got to see the seedy underbelly of medicine today in that process with Hospital A trying to get more market share from Hospital B. So went back, did a doctorate in epidemiology, saw a lot of the same issues, that came up during my training. Though I focused on nutrition, movement, lifestyle, these types of modalities that are, I'm sure, of interest to many of your, viewers and listeners. I took a faculty position at the University of Maryland School of Medicine Center for Integrative Medicine, which is the first in the world, actually, academic-based medical center doing work in things like acupuncture, yoga, herbs. We did a lot of TCM work. I know you've got an interest in. And I came on board and started doing, sort of dietary supplement research and nutritional genetics, just really kind of spanning this whole integrative functional and lifestyle medicine space. I've been directing the center for the last 5 years and work a lot with IFM and the functional medicine community, and with groups like yours that are putting forth what I think are products and technologies that can support our health.
Yeah, awesome. And originally, it's funny because you weren't originally going to get involved with Blushield, or we weren't initially working together, but then some things happened with Dr. Helen Messier, who was originally leading it, and then put us in contact with you. And it's been really kind of an interesting ride. And I really appreciate your multiple modality, multidisciplinary approach to health and wellness, because that's how we view it at Blushield USA. We're looking at herbs and dietary strategies, and we're looking at EMF. And EMF is often one of those things that, I think for many years, at least, it was appreciated, and nobody really looked at it as far as being a mechanism where, our health can be literally impacted by the voltage and the energy in our environment. So one other thing that I thought was really cool about what you do that I don't think you mentioned is that you're part of that project Documenting Hope, which I think is a really cool project. We're donating some Blushield machines to kind of help with the children there. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it's pretty fascinating.
That's awesome. I was definitely going to bring it up. So I've got a 1-year-old, and my first child, and I've really taken interest in childhood health. It was part of what I was doing before. We've done a lot of work with these multimodality interventions that you mentioned, which is unique in science. A lot of times it's like looking at a single molecule or a single intervention and its effects. And that sometimes gets you part of the way there, but there's synergy a lot of times when you throw multiple modalities at something. And we've been doing a lot of that kind of work in Baltimore with nutrition and mindfulness, exposure to nature, these kinds of things, and saw really good results. And the Documenting Hope project came on my radar. Martha Herbert was the previous scientific director and principal investigator, and she's done a lot of work, good work with EMFs and environmental contributors to autism and other childhood chronic diseases. And when I was approached to succeed Martha in this work, I jumped at it. Beth Lambert, the executive director, wrote a great book on autism a number of years ago, and actually in other chronic diseases. So we take a look at the underlying risk factors for just this epidemic of childhood chronic disease. I mean, autism is a big one. 1 in 10,000 back when we were kids to 1 in 36 now.
Right.
I mean, and there's been some changes in diagnostic criteria, but even since those changes in diagnostic criteria, we're looking at 1 in a couple hundred to 1 in 36. That's a massive change. But other things, allergies, asthma, autoimmunity, the 4As. But there's lots of other things, and we're looking at a lot of these underlying risk factors and the synergies between them and what we call the total load. Not novel to us. That concept's been around for a while. The total load of stressors, the toxins we breathe, we drink, the medical interventions sometimes we get that we don't need, bad food, and EMFs. So one of the reasons I was so excited to work with you is that I've had a long interest in EMF mitigation, and a lot of the strategies today they're difficult for people to do. The Blushield device was of interest to me. I'd heard of it and was excited to be a part of the study.
Yeah, and we've been doing a lot of work over the years to bring awareness about EMF pollution as a source of stress and potential mechanism for disease in the body for a number of years. And up until recently, nobody really gave it the time of day. So I'm kind of curious, from an allopathic or like medicine perspective, what do you see as far as like the potential dangers and risks of high levels of RF and radio frequency and different types of electromagnetic radiation in the environment?
Sure. Unfortunately, it still is dramatically underappreciated in medicine right now. You get pockets of folks that are aware. We're actually working on putting forth a training potential at the Building Biology Institute, which is a great resource for those that aren't familiar with it, trying to educate more physicians and scientists who just don't get much exposure to this. But the evidence is clear. So if you look at RF, radio frequencies, which are a type of electromagnetic field, crystal clear the issues that there are with reproductive health when we look at things like sperm counts, motility, quality. This is pretty well documented that exposure to RF damages that. Perhaps even more concerningly, although that's already pretty concerning, we look at some of the fertility challenges faced across the world today, but cancers. So the World Health Organization recognizes radio frequencies and magnetic fields as class 2A probable carcinogens. If you look at the evidence for exposure to RF and gliomas, for example, so we just don't hear much about this. It doesn't get the recognition that it deserves. And we even understand the mechanisms, now why that is. When you look at the activation of these voltage gated calcium channels, which floods cells with calcium, causes oxidative stress and inflammation. And we know what happens when you're in a chronic state of inflammation, problems occur.
Right.
And this disrupts melatonin production. So it is some people are more sensitive than others, for sure. There are those that we call electrohyposensitive. There's been some changes in terminology of that as well, but it's hurting all of us if we don't get away from it. It's just harder and harder to do because these sources are pervasive these days in all these wireless technologies.
Yeah, and the causal mechanism of action is still not very well understood. I mean, we have some good research from Dr. Martin Paul, like you're saying, with the voltage-gated calcium channels. Yeah. There's some suggested, like with glucose and blood sugar levels, like Magda Havis's work. We see these bits and pieces, but how they interconnect is not very well known. What we do know is that we're electromagnetic beings. Voltage is part of our cellular makeup. I mean, we have an average of 70 to 90 millivolts at the cell level at any given time. So we're basically electromagnetic water machines on the purely physical level. So it would make sense that non-native repetitive electromagnetic frequencies, energy waves could affect our biology in that significant way. And I think there's more and more documentation coming out. We write a lot on our blog about the hardcore research that's been done on that. And that's what we tend to focus on with Blushield as far as getting the good, real data and information that's kind of been swept under the rug, so to speak. I wanted to kind of go into a little bit about our study, and I think there's some terminologies that people might not understand. Most people aren't really familiar with clinical research, and I just wanted to go over a couple of these types of values that we see in the paper that we're that we've put online. So I'm curious, can you explain for us and to people what p-value means when you're talking about statistically significant research?
All right, we're getting right into the nitty-gritty. So a p-value basically tells you what the probability is that your findings are due merely to chance, right? If you look at enough observations, some kind of outcome. Sometimes it's due merely to chance that you might find something in your study. So a p-value typically less than 0.05 is considered what we call statistically significant for most outcomes. And that just leads you to believe that these findings are most likely meaningful. Now, two things influence that. The magnitude of the association, like how strong is the effect of whatever is you're measuring, that's one part. And the second is, how big is your sample? So what's of interest, I'd say in our study, and we'll talk about this for sure, is it was not a really big study, and yet there were still a number of statistically significant findings, which is suggestive that there was a pretty reasonable magnitude of effect. So that's what a p-value is. Now, some other studies will be a little bit different. There's a different threshold, but typically less than 0.05 is considered statistically significant.
Okay, so it basically tries to weed out the chance of like randomness and just it's a chance occurrence that this happened.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So if you get that threshold, now again, a lot of us that get deep into the weeds of this stuff, if it's 0.051, does it mean it doesn't matter? No, of course not. But that's the threshold we typically use. And when you see a statistically significant finding, it means that that's most likely not due to chance, that there's something real there.
Yeah, and the people that approached us initially to do this study, the people that they gathered to be participants or test subjects were actually quite healthy. That's I was looking at the blood sugar because we showed the 8% drop in blood sugar over the 12 weeks, and I thought that was it doesn't seem like a high percentage, but when you look at their baseline, it's pretty impressive. I mean, these people had blood sugar levels that I think anybody would be happy with for the most part across the board. So I thought there were some interesting findings there, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the voltage gated calcium channels in particular, because there was some hypermethylation going on. I wondered if you could just, in broad brushstrokes, I mean, it's easy to get in the weeds with genetic type stuff and terminology. And I just wanted to we talk about the hypermethylation of certain genes expressions, and I was hoping you can talk a little bit about the findings there.
Yeah, definitely. First, actually, I'll touch upon that point you made before this, and that's regarding the relatively healthy sample. That's something substantial. So in the paper, talk about what we call ceiling effects. So there's only so high you can go. If you're starting close to the ceiling of your room, you can't go up much higher. So we have something similar in research. So this was a pretty healthy sample. So the fact that they were actually sleeping pretty well at baseline, the fact that they had pretty solid self-reported health at baseline and still had these statistically significant improvements is saying something. So that's another term for those that read the paper that you'll see there. We expect actually that these types of effects would be greater for those that maybe were not sleeping as well, or their cognitive function was a little worse, or their health was. So that's just when I touch upon that good point you made. So as far as the methylation of the voltage-gated calcium channels, so again, as you mentioned, this is certainly one of the main mechanisms. There may be others, the way that RF and other EMFs are hurting us. But in brief, so when you methylate, so you may have heard about methylated folate, or for supplements are big, or methylation. It's basically silencing genes. Okay, and you want a balance of that. If you get too much or hypomethylated, that can create issues. And if you get hypermethylated, that can create issues too. But that's why we want to kind of focus in on the genes of interest, because there's lots and lots of genes that are looked at when you look at these global methylation tests. We actually looked a little more specifically. So if we look at the voltage-gated calcium channels genes, we typically would want those to be methylated. We'd want that to be suppressed, those genes to be turned off,
right,
for most people. Because most of us are living, got the Wi-Fi router, might have a cell phone tower around, I would hate to see people do it, but you have the phone by your head when you're sleeping, these kinds of things. You're probably going to want to silence those genes. So that's actually what we saw in this study. A couple of these key voltage-gated calcium channel VGCC genes, and one in particular, were hypermethylated or suppressed, which is offers us a nice mechanism into why we might have seen some of the benefits in the study that we saw. So it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and there's 3 of those that were on the same chromosome too. So 3 of those pathways,
yeah,
which is pretty exciting according to True Diagnostics, what they were saying about how interesting that piece is. That was really really quite cool. And then we also
Yeah.
have the inflammation markers, which, you know, the reduction in natural killer cells. And again, like you're saying, from my background in herbalism and physiology and traditional Chinese medicine, with natural killer cells, it's good and bad, right? So if you're fighting
Mhm.
an infection, you want higher levels. But if
Yep.
in case of the body always being exposed to radio frequency and trying to mount an immune response to it, meaning activating white blood cells, and natural killer cells, the fact that they were down regulated seems to be pretty significant. You want to comment on those findings?
That was interesting. I mean, again, I think for most of the folks in this study, you're probably looking at excessive inflammation being more of an issue than the acute, because inflammation is wonderful in the acute phase. If you've got a cut and you need that to scab up, you know, you've got an infection or whatever it is, you want high levels of natural killer cells. But for the most part, if you know, if you're generating these natural killer cells like on a persistent basis, you know, this is one way that you know, one of the ways we would say this is a kind of a chronic inflammatory state. So it was encouraging to see you know, decreased activity of those in this, which again kind of lends itself to an underlying mechanism of how, you know, we saw better cognition and some other outcomes in the study. Lower inflammation tends to lend itself to that.
Yeah, and I'm actually just curious because a lot of people talk. You mentioned building biologists earlier, and a lot of these people are trained to use, you know, tri-field meters, various high frequency detecting instruments that kind of give you a general idea of the, you know, ambient radiation in their environment. I'm wondering, have you seen any research or information regarding the shielding methodology? Because our product is a plug and play. You just put it in the environment and it reacts with biology. So your plants, animals, your body, your cells,
Right.
it's working on that level. So I'm just wondering if you've come across any research on the opposite end of the spectrum, where the living in the cage kind of model.
You know, I haven't seen like good clinical studies like we did for that. So I have some of those meters. I'm looking right at them right now, actually, that you can measure RF. And that's what they typically do a good job at blocking radio frequencies. They don't block magnetic fields very well. And those emanate more from like the wiring in your house, or if you're near high voltage power lines. If you are, and if you can, I would suggest to move. They're bad news.
Pretty gnarly.
Yeah, right. And or if you're like, you know, your bed's behind the refrigerator or something, so that's where you would get more magnetic fields. They don't really block those very much, nor do they block electric fields. There are ways that you can do that, but it's a little bit complicated. So what I have seen, and I've seen it myself, is that those types of shielding, like if you make like a bed canopy out of that, they do block the RF. The question that I have is they're usually metal based, is unless you're in a very low electric field environment. We haven't talked about that one so much yet. If you're then that is mostly from your electrical wiring. They may actually be conductive. So they need to be grounded. And then you get the question of, well, you're grounding through your electrical outlet. You can tell, this is what I was getting earlier, it gets kind of complicated,
Yeah.
shielding. You know, if you were to build a new house, sure, I could see some value to, you're potentially shielding, you're close to your neighbors, getting some of the paint and that kind of stuff, but it's tough to do from the inside. You'd rather try to address these issues through other means if you can. First, certainly turning off your Wi-Fi router, wiring your home for Ethernet, even better. Not having this, you know, putting the cell on airplane, that kind of stuff you should do, period. The Blushield device is encouraging because that's something that you can just plug in and not have to worry about, because it is pretty expensive to do all that shielding stuff. I mean, again, they're often made out of silver. And again, I've got some of it. You know, I think it's makes sense to do a multi-pronged, multifaceted approach to EMF mitigation, especially if you've got little ones in the house or if you're sensitive. But there are some serious drawbacks to some of the shielding.
Yeah, and a lot of them people don't really think about, as far as, you know, I mean, magnetism, like you're saying, that's a hard force to contend with, because I mean, it's the fundamental force of reality. You have the magnetic and the dielectric, which are two sides of the same coin, and our body creates a voltage field, and our body is, you know, dielectric in nature. So if we're putting metal around our body, it can detract from our natural cell voltage. So I was just wondering if you seen any research, because I've always hypothesized that, you know, living in a metal cage is probably more detrimental than better, because you don't get rid of the scalar component or the informational field component, the longitudinal aspect of it, but also you might be detracting from the body's natural dielectric and losing proper cell voltage regulation at that level. So I think, you know, obviously putting as much nature between you and cell towers and all of this stuff is kind of ideal, but that really doesn't help people in, you know, major metropolitan areas where it's stuff's
Yeah.
all over the place. Even if you're shielding everything, you're just getting hammered from every direction. So that's when I got involved with Blushield back in 2017. That's why I was really kind of excited about the idea, because having something you can just plug in that works at the cellular biology level. And we know that nutrition plays a factor. I mean, it's harder to mitigate EMF with nutrition, like having high level magnesium, you know, make sure your melatonin and serotonin conversion is happening properly, all these factors. But being highly mineralized, eating nutrient dense, antioxidant rich food, you're going to do a lot better in an EMF rich environment than somebody that's not. So all these things kind of and also your exercise level, your electromotive force that your biofield creates through exercise, pumping blood, the iron in your blood circulating, the magnetic field that the body creates is super important.
Brandon, you're talking about the total load right there. I mean, this is exactly what we're doing with Documenting Hope. And that's exactly it. It's also sort of like so there's a total load of stressors. So let's say that you're in a real high EMF environment, and you've also got a bunch of VOCs from cleaning chemicals in your house. You've got mold. You know, you're emotionally stressed. You're not eating well. So you start to throw these multiple stressors in. It's a problem, but you throw the multiple health protecting things in, a nutrient-rich diet, like you were mentioning, being physically active, not too much, but enough. You know, starting to throw some of these other things in there, and you can get that sort of synergy for health as well. One other, you know, as you were talking, you're a wealth of knowledge. I've enjoyed learning from you regarding, you know, a lot of these the wave, like scale wave and things, which I didn't know much about before. But another thing to think about is that, so I'm a big fan of grounding, huge fan. And I used to use a grounding mat inside, and I think there's a place for that, but you have to make sure you're in the right environment for it. So I think grounding outside in the woods or whatever is fantastic. Beach, probably the best of all.
Right.
But with the grounding mats, I'm not sure what you think about this actually, but if you plug those in through your electrical system, so what I noticed, you were kind of talking about, you know, what happened. So I used to live in a condo, the Wi-Fi routers all over the place that I couldn't get my neighbors to not use them. Cell phone tower not too far away, and I had my canopy, and I also plugged in a grounding mat. And I tell you, when I had the grounding mat plugged into my outlet, I had the weirdest, most wired sleep. Again, I was going in with a placebo effect, not nocebo. I looked at my HRV, it was horrible. It's like, that had to be, something was weird last night. Did it again. I'm like, and it's just this, I'd never really quite felt that before. And I think I was picking up, you know, that extra voltage. And, you know, again, I since got a voltmeter and noticed, like, you know, when you're using that in a house that's got some wiring issues, or if, God forbid, you're around an apartment or condo with all kinds of stuff, I think it can do more harm than good. And that's coming from someone who loves grounding. So I'm curious to get if I can return the question, I'm curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, really, I'm not a huge fan of plugging yourself into the circuit of the house, because it's really about signal to noise ratio. Okay. So similar to radio frequency, the radio frequency isn't inherently bad. That's what people don't get about the nature of radio frequencies. I mean, we're in a electromagnetic universe, right? All the frequencies are already there. We're just harvesting it from the environment. So when you plug yourself in to the ground of a house, you're basically closing a circuit. So you're basically making your body part of all of the electrical appliances and everything that's all the alternating current devices in the house. And that's going to mess you up, and it makes you more in alignment with that signal, which has a bunch of noise on it. So if you're sending a carrier signal through you know, cell phone towers, it's not necessarily the carrier signal that's bad. It's all the noise and the code and the information that's on that signal that really wreaks havoc in the body. It just if you take an acoustometer or make those frequencies auditory to where you can hear them, it sounds like
it's crazy.
Just drive you nuts. So you're literally making yourself more conducive to a noisy circuit by grounding yourself. Whereas if you walk on the beach, for example, you're basically discharging your static field and making yourself more in alignment with the earth, which is just we have a Gaussian surface above us and below us, and in between lightning and discharges and electromagnetics that are very beneficial for our body. So again, kind of going back to the idea of, like, living in a cage, blocking. I mean, there's a lot of beneficial plasma energy in the environment that's very beneficial for us, that we don't really want to block that electrostatic charge out either. We want to absorb that. But of course, if we have noisy signals like Wi-Fi routers that are, while we're sleeping, that's not really going to be great as well. So it's really about keeping your body in tune with itself and making your body more self-referential. And that is going to strengthen your biofield and your electromagnetic potential, your cell voltage, and that's going to keep you healthier long-term versus trying to discharge that along with gaining a bunch of like signal noise from the circuit.
Yeah. Probably picking up some of that dirty electricity and some of those kinds of things. I mean, it's interesting. So I'll give it, one of the workarounds that I tried, because again, I just feel so great when I ground. I was like, I got to try to, wouldn't it be great if you could do it for 8 hours a night? So what I did was actually got a long cord and put it outside. And that does not work very well where I'm now, because there's ground current in certain places. So there's certain places that are great to ground and other places that aren't so much. So again, you mentioned Magda Havas. She's done some really interesting work on ground current, and they've seen with interestingly, if you report cows that are having issues, you've got a dairy farm, you can get the power company to do something about the ground current. But if you've got kids or yourself, they don't do, because they've seen so much that cows would get irritated being on a ground that has ground current. They'd kind of lift their hooves, and so you got to be kind of careful. That's what I thought the workaround was, but I'm not even sure that it's that great of a workaround. Again, I think the work that Clint Ober and the grounding and earthing community has done is awesome. I think they've done such a great job raising awareness about it. But like you, I've got deep concerns about plugging it in, and even some concerns about, depending on where you are, because you can also pick up the grounding mat and wire can pick up, because the electric field doesn't stop right at the end. It goes out. I mean, you probably know better, but I think it's like what, 4, 5, 6 feet, something like that.
Yeah, and
So
anything plugged into, that's the other component, is like you plug a toaster, a Vitamix, any electrical component. Even Blushield will have a voltage field. Of course, we have filters, and the transmission is 100% pure longitudinal null phase emissions, which is the informational field that affects the biology in a beneficial way. But when you plug it in, if you were just touching a Blushield that was plugged in, there would be a voltage field around it. That's just natural with anything connected to the mains. So and then the other side of that is like with your net webbing and all this kind of stuff, any metal is going to act like an aerial. So think about an antenna, how that works. There's potential where you're actually attracting a lot more stuff than you'd actually want. Kind of like how the coils, and some people's, I don't, and you probably don't at this point, where you're not really sleeping on springs, but
not anymore, right?
Really know that radio frequency can be condensed and spiraled up into the body and almost amplified in a sense, where they act like so metal in the environments. And I've just, over the years, I've started realizing, Blushield is really awesome technology because it's plug and play. You just set it and forget it, and you don't have to really think about it. But there are electromagnetic tools that we can use to enhance. So I find what works better for people and in the long term is charging up on like if you have a pure point source analog PEMF device, pulse electromagnetic field therapy, you charge up, you'll have a residual charge for 4 hours. So you're sleeping while your cells are charged, and you have you kind of undo the Rouleau effect, and you have more oxygen, nutrients, and circulation in the body. Your voltage potential is optimized. Plasma fields are probably the most advanced, I would say, more than PEMF. If you can get in a high coherent bioactive plasma field, that's going to really charge the body up to where you're going to sleep really good, no matter really what radiation. Obviously, anything that's closer to you, you don't want to like sleep with a cell phone on your body or anything like that. But versus trying to connect yourself to a house circuit, which is dirty noise to signal ratio, wiring things around your body, putting a bunch of metal around your body, which could basically potentially amplify, the effects and act like an antenna. If you charge internally from the cells, and that's how Blushield works, it's charging the bodies at the cell level and affecting the hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen in the blood. And you're basically structuring that water at a very high level to where you get proper cell communication. Because when we look at chronic disease, inflammation, cancer, things like this, it's really, if we're going to like broad brushstroke simplify it, cancer cells are just lost their ability to communicate with other cells, right? I mean, it's really about cellular communication. So the ways we can optimize that through PEMF therapy, through plasma fields, through nutrition, diet, mineralization, all those things are going to give us a far better result than being chronically stressed and worried about, the voltage fields in our area. I mean, if you're living in a modern house, you're going to have voltage fields. I mean, There's just no really getting away from that unless you, like you're saying, do very expensive, very sophisticated ways. And some people think that their houses are shielded, but they can still make cell phone calls. So like they think that they have a
Right.
better that's shielded. But if you're making a cell phone call, how effective is that? Yes, you can dampen it, kind of like the little fun little hats. It's like our tinfoil hats. Right? We have these silver lined hats. But it'll dampen RF frequency, which is the benefit of why people wouldn't want to put metal around their house in general. And I like the energy and vibration of silver and gold and these kind of more pure metals. However, you know, it's not going to really solve everything. And you know, I'm not saying that Blushield solves everything, obviously, but we have to be aware and conscious of what we're doing. And where I see Blushield going is we can actually make technologies that piggyback our algorithm on it, so it makes it more coherent, which really is what I want to see long term from the Blushield side. Is how do we make routers that actually give you all the benefits of the technology that you want without really giving you the cellular noise, so to speak.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I'd heard some of, you know, some efforts that were going into making safer routers. And again, I've got my house hardwired for Ethernet, but that's not an option for everybody.
Right.
But I had heard, and then it just never really picked up. First, I think that's why raising awareness is so key for this stuff. There's got to be a market demand for it. But no, it is really cool to think about how you could apply some of this technology and then to other things too. I think about you're on a plane or whatever it might be. Are there ways to, God, there's so many sources of it these days, especially with, I mean, if we're looking specifically at RF, just the ever going expansion of smart devices, and can hear the disdain in my voice the way I say that, but you know, then of course the 5G stuff with the Internet of Things going to be all over the place. So, and then the other question is, how do you even measure that? So there really, until recently, there wasn't even a good consumer meter to measure the millimeter waves. I believe Safe Living Technologies just came out like earlier this year with one, and that's only still a band of the frequencies. So there's still lots of other frequencies, like radars on car. All these cars have radar now. You know, you're not going to measure that on Acousticom's awesome. I have one too, and that's a way if you ever want to like kind of open up someone's eyes to how the RF is damaging them, turn that thing on, you know, and someone's gonna say, "Wow, that's," but they don't measure the frequency, a lot of the frequencies that are there today. You get other things too, radar, you know, from if you live near an airport or all kinds of other stuff, other sources that are out there. So it's just it's concerning, and that's why I think what is pretty neat about the Blushield technology and some of the plasma stuff that you've been talking about as well. I mean, ways to mitigate this. I like you know, near infrared sauna as well as another way to kind of charge ourselves, because you got to like, and you mentioned too, magnesium and some of these things. There's lots of ways that you can mitigate the damage, but you got to do a lot of this stuff, in my view, to do it. And you know, one of the downsides potentially of shielding that you mentioned, and I didn't realize this until fairly recently, is that yes, you may be solving the RF problem, but you could be, as you noted, introducing, you know, more, you know, the electric fields that are coming in, you know, you're basically conducting things. So it's like solving one problem, but then creating several others. This is just the issue we need to be aware of.
Yeah, and we can also work to simplify and find things that are more like, for example, you say magnesium, and I'm saying trace minerals, and you see something like bamboo chlorophyll. So bamboo chlorophyll powder is really interesting because it has all the proper amino acids with the proper molecular size. It has the minerals, it has the magnesium, it has all this kind of stuff, and it has almost identical chemistry to blood plasma. So it's got a lot of things going for it. So it's one thing that kind of covers a lot of the basis, like a Swiss Army knife. It has a lot of different functions. So I think there's ways we can kind of simplify and optimize. And the newest edition, the Evo of the Blushield, is kind of doing that. It's incorporating this new multiple waveform output. That's just, if you can call it a way, it's not really a waveform, but a lot of people can relate to that idea or understanding. When you're talking about scalar, it's a totally different animal. But the way the circuit works is very much more advanced, and helps with like sleep. And people just have so many sleep issues these days, you know, staring at computers and phones all night long. Even if you're just, you know, putting, you know, the red spectrum or the yellow and orange like spectrums, it's still an electromagnetic effect. I mean, everything and
still bright sometimes, man.
Yeah,
I mean, it's also bright. Yeah, that's it. It's not just because I wear red glasses at night, and you know, so yeah, sure, you're blocking the blue and green in your eyes, but there's also some thought too, what's happening in the rest of your skin. I mean, most of it's happening from the receptors in the eye, but there's also just your skin in general. And then 100%. Also it's bright. I mean, it's above a certain lux, you know, brightness. So like if you're out and you got your orange or red glasses on, but your bright light still that signaling your body to be awake. So there's a lot of stuff there, but that's one of the things that was cool seeing the increased deep sleep, after using the Blushield device, and decreased respiratory rate, which you want, increased HRV, which you want. So yeah, we're in the midst of a real sleep and problem societally right now for a lot of reasons. This is one way to help, but there's a lot of sleep hygiene stuff that people need to do too.
Yeah, and kids, right? You said your son slept better the first night you
Yeah.
put that in, and this was
Yeah.
after you've been involved for a while. You didn't even have any experience with Blue Shield, and didn't you say that he slept
Yeah,
better?
yeah, he did. He did. Yeah, he's had, he's had some other issues with teething and stuff like that, but that I don't think, again, Booster didn't solve everything, but yeah, he did. And that's a real challenge, as anyone who's got kids can know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did, and I did. I noticed an increase in my my HRV, which was pretty neat. And I do a lot of stuff already, so I wasn't coming in, fresh, having not done any sleep hygiene type of thing. I do a lot of different things.
Yeah, and that's what's really cool is over the years we've heard so much anecdotal stuff like this. I mean, just on and on and
Yeah.
on. Like we have to get some, clinical data, just do a real research study because the interesting thing and the correlation between this study and some of the earlier studies that Mark did, he did some really basic grassroots stuff. And what I mean by grassroots is they'd go to a chicken farm, plug in Blue Shields, and just see how they responded. And originally in the chicken farm in Auckland, they would average like 120 chickens dying every month. Just, they're nervous animals. They peck each other. It's crowded. It's factory farming, which is not cool. I'm all about small scale farming as much as possible.
Likewise.
Anyway, they had about a half reduction. They went down to about 60 deaths per month, which is a half reduction. They were quieter. They just noticed these kind of observations and they documented it. And they also went and put Blue Shield necklaces on cows and tested the milk and stuff like that. And again, it was just like going out in the field, checking it out. That gave them like the confidence to put this out to market and saying, hey, this is doing really great stuff for animals and they can't have a psychosomatic effect,
Right.
So that's what initially got me interested in the technology. But after hearing all of this kind of stuff over the years, we just really wanted to put the pedal to the metal, like put this thing on the chopping block. Let's see what it can really do. So I really appreciate doing this for us and putting your name behind it and really analyzing it and writing this manuscript for us because this has been a lot of years of time and effort and education for people to try and teach them about the problems of EMF and hopefully having a efficacious solution that would really help people long term versus being a short term stimulus on the body with temporary effects, which I didn't even realize it for a long time. But when I started researching studies on different EMF products, they test it for like literally a matter of hours sometimes. Like they would only have anything you introduce into the environment, the body's going to react and adapt to. So very short studies are, while impressive looking on paper, they might not have a long-term effect because the body's going to kind of tune it out. There's an impedance that the body has where it tries to kind of tune things out. Even man-made non-native EMF, your body's trying to tune it out. And then when it gets so bad, it has to mount an immune response and really kind of burn your life force out. Just an immune power just trying to do that. That becomes chronic, and the inflammation, like you were saying, is good for us temporarily, but over time, that can be really problematic.
Yeah, well, I do 100%, and you commended me on taking on the study. I'll commend you too for being committed to doing the science on it. I mean, that's from the beginning, working with you and Natalie, whose name is on our screen now. Just we're so committed to doing good, rigorous, honest science, and that's I gotta say, never happens, but it's not as common as it should be. So I really commend you for wanting to put the technology to the test, and look forward to doing maybe some other studies too, because this was pretty encouraging, and I really commend your knowledge base and just your scientific, I would say, just willingness, to really evaluate it and see what happens. So that was just awesome. So
yeah, and
appreciate it.
I can reflect everything you're saying right back to you because, in my opinion, you're doing real research, real science. Obviously, we're in an age of like scientism where how books get cooked and how the research world is, and that can aspartame, that was approved. That was studied.
Yeah, exactly.
Released onto the market. So I'm not like doing this because I have full faith in like that system. Obviously if people are getting benefits and they're coming to me and saying their eye health is improving or their dog's chronic issues are improving or this kind of stuff, that makes
Sure.
me happy, whether it's psychosomatic or not. But I do like when people actually really research with an open mind and look at the evidence and test it against reality. You know, we
Yeah.
a lot of scientists that are basically glorified mathematicians, and all they care about is theoretics, and they keep it over here on a piece of paper, but don't test it against anything in nature or reality, which I think is the ultimate test in the end. So thanks for being open to that on this kind of almost fringe subject. I mean, it's gaining in popularity, but a lot of people really don't have any idea that EMF is potentially problematic on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, you mentioned scientism. There is a big issue with that too. I'm in the system, and like you, I don't have total faith, and I feel like we all need to be skeptical, ask questions, and anything that we're told we can't ask questions about should make you question it even more. You know, really, and I think we're getting more into that. The scientific process is wonderful. I mean, if you do a good study, it can provide truth. But I feel like a lot of times we've deviated away from truth just to, all right, this is a good way to, you know, get some big funding to whatever research institution, or going to put us in good graces with the NIH or whatever it might be. And there's more of that than I would have ever liked to have seen. But that doesn't mean that science can. We've seen a loss of trust, I think, in science and public health and medicine, these kinds of things. I think there are good researchers out there who do the right thing and are committed to looking at truth and so on. And you know, I'm glad we were able to connect. To do that with this. And you mentioned psychosomatic. I don't think it's psychosomatic. One of the cool things about our study was that looking at some of the underlying mechanisms, like it's hard to see how that, you know, looking at turning genes on. Now, I suppose one's thoughts could do that, you know, but it's I think there's more to it than that. And yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm fascinated by what you guys are doing. And yeah, we've got to continue to increase awareness of this, because it is, while still from fringy in your conventional medical system, the effects are real, and the science is there that show that this is a problem. I mean, even organizations like the World Health Organization, you know, so it's like, it's not like this is just a bunch of woo-woo stuff. This is like a very real problem.
Awesome. Cool. So do you have any closing thoughts? I hope, can you tell us where people can find out more about Documenting Hope? Because I think that's a really awesome project and people should check it out and help support and donate, because it is a non-for-profit. So
yeah, the Documenting Hope project, Epidemic Answers are two, you know, basically it's a related project, all the same people that are involved in that. But we're really looking at this as it pertains to the health of children. Now, what we're finding here is going to apply across the lifespan. So I think even those that maybe don't have a specific interest in the health of children, if you look at just how much chronic disease there is among children, even just looking at autism, I mean, the numbers I mentioned earlier are frightening for society. That's going to affect all of us. It already is. You know, it's going to absolutely affect all of us. So if you go to the Documenting Hope website, you know, you'll see me and the other members of the team that are there. You know, we're really committed to boldly looking at this, looking at risk factors that, you know, sometimes are taboo to look at. You know, we're looking at those. We're doing interventions with, you know, multimodality, looking at addressing EMF, looking at addressing toxins in the environment, looking at medical exposures and these types of things. So yeah, check it out, and you know, would be happy to connect with anybody on those topics too.
okay, great. Well, I appreciate everything. Is there any final thoughts or comments related to EMF or health otherwise?
Yeah, I just would say that I think Blushield is part of a strategy that you can put into play to help protect yourself, your family, your friends. Also, be aware of just, you know, minimizing uses of these devices where you can. You know, smart things like putting the phone on airplane at night, or putting it at least far away from you. Turning the Wi-Fi router off at night. And some of these common sense things that you can do, moving your bed a foot away from the wall. Maybe a little even more if you can, but something like that. These are things that aren't going to hurt you a whole lot. They're not going to interfere with your life too much. And you may find that you sleep better. You may find that you have a little more mental and physical energy. You may find that headache that you get isn't there anymore. So, you know, take these things seriously and think about the total load of things that you're doing in your life, and can help you perform better.
All right. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you. See you next time.
Likewise. Take care, man.